What happens when you push someone too far? When you destroy the one thing that matters most to them. Sophie Chun looked like the kind of person you'd walk past without a second glance. But sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest storms. Today's story will show you exactly what happens when bullies make the biggest mistake of their lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sophie Chun had perfected the art of invisibility at Clearwater High School. At 17, she moved through the crowded hallways like morning mist, there one moment and forgotten the next. Standing barely 5 feet 4 inches with straight black hair that fell like curtains around her face, she had mastered the delicate balance of being present but unnoticed. Her oversized cardigan hung loosely over paint-stained jeans, and her worn canvas sneakers made no sound against the polished floors. While other students filled the corridors with laughter and conversation, Sophie clutched her art portfolio against her chest like armor, her dark eyes fixed on the path ahead. The third-floor art studio had become Sophie's sanctuary during her 3 years at Clearwater High. While her classmates gathered in the cafeteria or courtyard during lunch, she could be found hunched over her easel, completely absorbed in whatever project demanded her attention. Ms. Rivera, the art teacher, had grown accustomed to finding Sophie there before first period and long after final dismissal, working with the kind of focused intensity that reminded her why she had chosen teaching. The studio smelled of acrylic paint and possibility, and Sophie breathed it in like oxygen. Most students at Clearwater knew Sophie existed in the same way they knew the library had books or the cafeteria served pizza on Fridays. She was part of the landscape, easily overlooked and rarely considered. In group projects, she was the reliable one who did the work without complaint. In classes, she was the student who turned in assignments on time but never raised her hand. Teachers appreciated her consistency, but rarely remembered her contributions. She had attended Clearwater since freshman year, yet most of her classmates would struggle to recall her last name. Sophie's appearance seemed specifically designed to avoid attention. She wore the same rotation of muted colors, earth tones and grays, that helped her blend into any background. Her hair was always clean but never styled, falling in a practical straight line that she could easily tuck behind her ears when working. She carried an ancient backpack covered in small pins from art museums and galleries, the only hint of personality she allowed herself to display. Her hands were perpetually stained with paint or charcoal, marks she wore like secret badges of honor. The social ecosystem of Clearwater High School operated with ruthless efficiency, and Sophie had quickly learned where she fit in the hierarchy. She existed in the vast middle ground between the popular elite and the actively persecuted, occupying a space reserved for the unremarkable. She had no enemies because she posed no threat, no friends because she offered no social value, and no reputation because she had never done anything worth remembering. This careful neutrality had served her well for 3 years, allowing her to focus on what truly mattered to her. Art was Sophie's language in a world where she felt perpetually foreign. While other students expressed themselves through sports, or social media, or academic achievement, Sophie poured her entire soul into canvas and clay. Her work was deeply personal, drawing from her family's immigration story and her own struggles with identity and belonging. She painted her grandmother's weathered hands kneading dough, sculpted the weight of carrying multiple cultures, and created digital pieces that explored what it meant to be caught between worlds. Every brushstroke was a word she couldn't speak. Aloud, every color choice a feeling she couldn't express in conversation. Her teachers had noticed Sophie's exceptional talent early, though they struggled to connect with the quiet girl who created such emotionally powerful work. Ms. Rivera had been trying for months to encourage Sophie to enter competitions or apply for art scholarships, but Sophie seemed content to create for herself alone. Her portfolio was already impressive enough to gain admission to several prestigious art programs. Yet she had never mentioned college plans or career aspirations. She simply painted and drew and sculpted as if her life depended on it, which, in many ways it did. The current project consuming Sophie's attention was her most ambitious yet. She had been working on it for 6 months, a mixed media installation that would serve as her senior exhibition piece. The work combined traditional painting with sculptural elements, family photographs, and digital components that told the story of 3 generations of women in her family. It was deeply personal, incorporating her grandmother's immigration documents, her mother's naturalization papers, and her own exploration of what it meant to be American. The piece represented not just her artistic growth, but her understanding of herself and her place in the world. Sophie had claimed a corner of the art studio as her workspace, carefully organizing her materials with the precision of someone who understood that chaos in one area of life required order in another. Her installation occupied a table and 2 easels, with additional components stored in carefully labeled boxes beneath. She had documented every stage of the process in a notebook filled with sketches, color studies, and written reflections. This was more than a school project. It was her attempt to make sense of her own story through art. Other students occasionally wandered through the art studio, but few paid attention to Sophie's work in progress. Those who did glance over would see abstract shapes and muted colors, not understanding the cultural significance or emotional weight embedded in every element. Sophie preferred it this way, working in relative anonymity while pouring her heart into something that would eventually speak for itself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She had learned long ago that explanation diminished the power of visual art, and she trusted that the right viewers would understand without words. As spring semester progressed toward the senior art exhibition, Sophie found herself working with even greater intensity. This piece would be her statement to the world, her proof that quiet people could create loud art. She had no way of knowing that her carefully constructed invisibility was about to be shattered, or that her greatest artistic achievement would become the catalyst for a confrontation that would change everything. What nobody at Clearwater High School knew about Sophie Chen was that beneath her paint-stained fingers lay a different kind of artistry entirely. While her classmates saw only a quiet girl who spent her time mixing colors and sketching in notebooks, Sophie possessed skills that would make most adults twice her age envious. Her father, David Chen, worked as a senior cybersecurity analyst for a major tech company in Portland, and he had been teaching his daughter the digital world's hidden languages since she was 12 years old. The Chen household operated differently than most suburban homes in Millbrook, where other families gathered around televisions or dinner tables. The Chens often found themselves huddled around multiple computer screens, analyzing data patterns and discussing the latest developments in digital security. David had immigrated from Taiwan as a young man with nothing but exceptional programming skills and an unshakable work ethic. He had built his career by understanding that information was power, and he had passed this philosophy to his children, along with the technical skills to act on it. Sophie's education in digital forensics had begun almost accidentally. Her older brother Marcus had gotten into trouble during his senior year for what the school called cyberbullying, though the reality was more complex. Another student had been spreading vicious rumors about Marcus online, creating fake social media accounts and manipulating photos to make him look like someone he wasn't. The school's administration had been useless, claiming they couldn't regulate what happened on personal devices off campus. Traditional authority figures had failed, so David had decided to teach his children how to protect themselves. The lesson started simply enough. David showed Sophie how to trace IP addresses, how to identify fake accounts, and how to document digital evidence properly. He taught her about metadata, about reverse image searches, about the digital footprints that every online action left behind. What began as self-defense quickly became a fascination for Sophie, who discovered that tracking information through the internet required the same pattern recognition skills that made her successful at art. Both disciplines demanded patience, attention to detail, and the ability to see connections that others missed. By the time Sophie was 15, she could unravel most people's entire online presence within hours. She understood how to trace deleted posts, recover supposedly private messages, and map the connections between seemingly unrelated accounts. Her father had shown her how every digital action created evidence, how careless people left trails of their real thoughts and intentions, scattered across platforms they assumed were anonymous or temporary. She learned that most people were remarkably predictable in their online behavior, using the same passwords, following similar patterns, and making the same security mistakes repeatedly. Sophie had put these skills to use more than once, though always quietly and always for defensive purposes. When a classmate had been receiving threatening messages from unknown accounts during sophomore year, Sophie had spent a weekend tracking the harassment back to its source, discovering that the threats were coming from the girl's own ex-boyfriend, who was using a complex network of fake profiles to avoid detection. She had compiled the evidence and left it anonymously on the victim's locker, along with instructions on how to present it to authorities. The harassment had stopped immediately once the perpetrator realized his digital disguise had been penetrated. Her brother Marcus had also benefited from Sophie's growing expertise. Now attending Oregon State University, he regularly called her for help with various digital problems. Whether it was researching professors before class registration, investigating potential roommates, or helping friends who were dealing with online harassment, Marcus had learned to rely on his sister's ability to navigate the digital world with surgical precision. He joked that Sophie was like having a private detective in the family, but he had also seen firsthand how her skills could solve problems that traditional authority figures either couldn't or wouldn't address. The Chun family's approach to technology was markedly different from their neighbors and peers. While other parents struggled to monitor their children's internet usage or worried about the dangers lurking online, David had chosen to arm his children with knowledge and capability. He believed that understanding how systems worked was far more valuable than trying to avoid them entirely. Sophie had grown up knowing that privacy was largely an illusion, that digital permanence was real, and that information warfare was happening constantly around everyone, whether they realized it or not. Sophie's artistic pursuits and her digital abilities had begun to merge in unexpected ways. She had discovered online communities of artists who operated outside traditional gallery systems, selling work through encrypted platforms and using sophisticated digital marketing strategies to build followings. Through Marcus, who had connections in Portland's underground music scene, Sophie had gained access to a network of creators who understood both traditional media and cutting-edge technology. These artists taught her about protecting intellectual property online, about documenting creative processes for legal purposes, and about the ways that digital tools could enhance rather than replace traditional artistic methods. Her current installation project incorporated digital elements precisely because Sophie understood how to use technology meaningfully rather than just decoratively. She had created QR codes that linked to audio recordings of her grandmother speaking in Mandarin, embedded metadata in her digital photographs that told stories invisible to casual viewers, and designed interactive elements that would reveal different layers of meaning depending on how viewers approached them. The technical sophistication of her work was camouflaged by its emotional accessibility, creating art that functioned on multiple levels simultaneously. None of Sophie's teachers or classmates had any idea about this parallel expertise. To them, she was simply the quiet art student who occasionally helped with computer problems when asked politely. She had learned early that displaying technical knowledge often made people uncomfortable, particularly when it came from someone who didn't fit their expectations of what a computer expert should look like. Young women, especially quiet ones, were rarely suspected of possessing advanced digital skills, and Sophie had decided that this misconception served her purposes better than correcting it would. The irony was that Sophie's digital capabilities had made her more aware of her own vulnerability, not less. She knew exactly how easy it would be for someone with malicious intent to destroy her online presence, to spread false information about her, or to violate her privacy in ways that would be difficult to prove or prosecute. This knowledge had reinforced her preference for staying below the radar, for avoiding the kind of attention that might make her a target for someone else's digital warfare experiments. But Sophie also knew that information was indeed power, and that knowledge could be weaponized when necessary. She had spent years learning not just how to gather digital evidence, but how to present it effectively, how to expose hidden connections, and how to use people's own digital footprints against them. These were skills she hoped never to use maliciously, but they existed in her toolkit nonetheless, waiting quietly like her art supplies, ready to be deployed when the situation demanded them. The Chun family dinner table had always been a place where philosophy mixed with practical wisdom, where ancient Chinese values blended with modern American realities. David Chun had spent years teaching his children not just technical skills, but the ethical framework that should govern their use. Every lesson about digital forensics came paired with discussions about responsibility. Every demonstration of online investigation techniques was followed by conversations about the difference between justice and revenge. Sophie's father had experienced firsthand what happened when technological power was wielded without wisdom. During his early career in Taiwan, he had worked for a company where corporate espionage was considered standard practice, where hacking competitors and exposing their secrets was treated as just another business strategy. He had watched colleagues destroy careers with fabricated evidence, seen how easily digital manipulation could ruin innocent people, and observed the way that access to private information corrupted even well-intentioned individuals. These experiences had shaped his belief that knowledge without ethics was dangerous, that capability without restraint led inevitably to corruption. When David immigrated to the United States, he had made a conscious decision to use his skills only for protection and defense, never for attack or personal gain. He had turned down lucrative offers from companies that wanted him to engage in questionable practices, choosing instead to work in cybersecurity, where his role was explicitly about protecting rather than exploiting. This principle had guided every conversation with his children about technology, every lesson about digital investigation, every demonstration of what was possible in the online world. Sophie had absorbed these lessons deeply, understanding that her father's restraint came not from weakness but from strength, not from inability but from choice. She had grown up hearing stories about the damage that could be done when people used technology carelessly, about lives destroyed by digital vigilantes who thought they were serving justice, about the way that revenge often hurt innocent people more than intended targets. Her father had taught her that the most dangerous people in the digital world were not the obviously malicious hackers, but the righteous ones who believed their cause justified any means. The family's approach to conflict resolution had always emphasized patience and strategic thinking over immediate reaction. Sophie's mother, Elena, had her own influence on this philosophy, drawing from her background in social work to emphasize the importance of understanding underlying causes rather than just addressing symptoms. Elena had spent her career working with troubled teenagers and dysfunctional families, learning that lasting change required addressing root problems rather than simply punishing bad behavior. She had seen how cycles of retaliation perpetuated themselves, how victims who became perpetrators often caused more damage than their original tormentors. These combined influences had created in Sophie a deep reluctance to use her digital skills for anything that could be considered aggressive or invasive. She had established strict personal rules about when and how she would employ her technical knowledge, boundaries that she maintained even when doing so meant accepting unfair treatment. She would help victims document harassment that was already occurring, but she would not proactively investigate people without clear evidence of wrongdoing. She would trace threats and expose lies when asked for help, but she would not dig into people's private lives out of curiosity or personal animosity. Sophie's restraint was also influenced by her awareness of how quickly digital investigations could spiral out of control. She had studied enough cases of online mob justice to understand how easily circumstantial evidence could be misinterpreted, how quickly accusations could spread beyond the ability to control them, how often the people who got hurt worst were peripheral figures who had little to do with the original conflict. Her father had shown her examples of innocent people whose lives were destroyed because amateur investigators made assumptions, jumped to conclusions, or failed to verify their information thoroughly. The technical capabilities that Sophie possessed came with an understanding of their own limitations and dangers. She knew that digital evidence could be manipulated, that context was often more important than content, that the most sophisticated lies were those that contained elements of truth. She had learned to be suspicious of her own initial conclusions, to verify information through multiple sources, to consider alternative explanations for patterns that seemed obvious. This methodical approach extended beyond technical work into her general philosophy about conflict and confrontation. At school, Sophie's restraint manifested as an almost supernatural patience with unfair treatment. When classmates made thoughtless comments about her appearance or cultural background, she remained silent rather than researching their own vulnerabilities and exposing them publicly. When group project partners took credit for her work, she accepted the injustice rather than using her digital skills to document and expose their academic dishonesty. When she overheard cruel gossip about herself or others, she resisted the temptation to trace the rumors to their sources and retaliate with equally damaging information about the perpetrators. This self-imposed restraint created significant internal tension for Sophie, who often found herself biting her tongue when she could have easily defended herself or others. She would sit in classes listening to students spread false information or make bigoted statements, knowing that she could destroy their social media presence within hours if she chose to act. She would watch bullies torment vulnerable classmates while possessing the tools to expose every hypocritical or embarrassing thing those bullies had ever done online. The constant choice between action and inaction had become a defining feature of her high school experience. Sophie's parents had reinforced these ethical boundaries through regular conversations about current events and technology ethics. They discussed cases where digital vigilantism had gone wrong, analyzed news stories about privacy violations and online harassment, and explored the philosophical questions surrounding surveillance and personal responsibility. These discussions had helped Sophie develop a sophisticated understanding of the ethical complexities involved in digital investigation, but they had also created additional pressure to maintain her moral standards, even when doing so felt personally costly. The promise Sophie had made to herself and her family was that she would never become the kind of person who used private information to hurt others, regardless of what they had done to deserve it. She had seen too many examples of people who started with noble intentions but gradually became comfortable with increasingly questionable tactics, justifying each escalation as necessary for the greater good. Sophie was determined to avoid that slippery slope by maintaining clear, inflexible boundaries about what she would and would not do with her technical abilities. This restraint had been tested repeatedly throughout her time at Clearwater High School, creating moments where her principles conflicted directly with her desire for justice or self-protection. Each time she chose patience over retaliation, silence over exposure, endurance over action, the internal pressure built slightly. Sophie had become like a dam holding back an enormous reservoir of capability, maintaining her restraint through sheer force of will and moral conviction, not realizing that every system has a breaking point, and that even the strongest dams can only withstand so much pressure before they fail catastrophically. Spring semester at Clearwater High School brought with it the annual Senior Art Exhibition, an event that had grown in prestige and importance over the past decade. What had once been a simple hallway display of student work had evolved into a major community event, complete with professional lighting, printed programs, and attendance from local gallery owners, college recruiters, and scholarship committees. For students in the advanced art program, the exhibition represented far more than academic assessment. It was their introduction to the professional art world, their first real opportunity to have their work evaluated by people who might influence their futures. Sophie had not initially planned to participate in the main exhibition space. The senior show was traditionally dominated by students who had spent years building relationships with teachers, networking with peers, and positioning themselves for maximum visibility. Her father was a prominent real estate developer who owned significant property throughout Millbrook, while her mother served on the school board and chaired multiple community organizations. The Walsh family name carried weight in local politics and business circles, creating a network of protection and influence that extended far beyond the high school walls. Madison had grown up understanding that power was something to be accumulated and deployed strategically, that reputation was a form of currency, and that controlling information about others was the key to maintaining control over them. Source of Madison's interest in Sophie Chun had emerged gradually over the past month as word spread about the quiet art student's upcoming exhibition piece. Madison possessed an acute sensitivity to shifts in social dynamics, and she had noticed the way teachers spoke about Sophie's work with genuine enthusiasm, the way Ms. Rivera had begun advocating for Sophie's inclusion in scholarship discussions, and the way certain influential community members had expressed interest in attending the senior art show specifically to see Sophie's installation. These developments represented a threat to Madison's carefully maintained position as the school's most promising student, the one destined for prestigious college acceptances and local recognition. Madison's methodology for dealing with potential competitors had been refined over years of practice. She understood that direct confrontation was messy and often backfired, creating sympathy for targets and making her own behavior appear obviously malicious. Instead, she preferred subtle campaigns of social isolation and reputation damage, using her extensive network of friends and followers to spread doubt and negativity without leaving clear fingerprints. Madison had perfected the art of destroying people through whispered conversations, strategic exclusions, and carefully planted suggestions that gradually eroded their credibility and social standing. Tyler Brooks had attached himself to Madison's social circle during sophomore year, recognizing that proximity to her power would solve most of his own social problems. At 18, Tyler possessed the kind of imposing physical presence that had made him useful to Madison as an enforcer of her social decisions. Standing 6 feet 2 inches with the broad shoulders and muscular build of a dedicated athlete, Tyler had earned his place on the varsity basketball team through raw talent rather than academic achievement. His family situation was more complicated than Madison's wealth and influence, with his single mother working multiple jobs to keep up with the expenses of his athletic pursuits and college preparation. Tyler's loyalty to Madison stemmed from practical calculation rather than genuine friendship. He understood that his athletic abilities would only carry him so far, that his academic performance was marginal at best, and that his family lacked the connections necessary to open doors that talent alone could not. Madison had provided him with social credibility, helped him navigate academic challenges through her network of high-achieving friends, and created opportunities for him to meet influential adults who might support his college recruitment process. In exchange, Tyler served as Madison's physical presence in situations where intimidation might be necessary, using his size and athletic reputation to make Madison's targets feel vulnerable and isolated. Tyler's approach to social conflict was far less sophisticated than Madison's psychological warfare. He relied primarily on physical intimidation, strategic blocking of hallways, aggressive body language, and the implicit threat of violence that his size and athletic reputation provided. While Madison destroyed people through manipulation and social pressure, Tyler preferred more direct methods of making people uncomfortable, using his physical presence to create fear and submission. His role in Madison's campaigns was to escalate situations that Madison's subtlety could not resolve, to provide the muscle that backed up her social maneuvering. Chloe Martinez had earned her place in Madison's inner circle through her exceptional skills in digital manipulation and social media warfare. At 16, Chloe possessed an intuitive understanding of online platforms that made her invaluable to Madison's reputation management efforts. Despite her petite stature and deceptively innocent appearance, Chloe had developed into a master of psychological manipulation through technology, using carefully curated social media presence and strategic information sharing to influence her classmates' perceptions and behaviors. Chloe's family had immigrated from Mexico when she was young, and she had learned early that assimilation required not just language skills, but social navigation abilities that could protect her from becoming a target herself. She had observed Madison's rise to power with calculating interest, recognizing that Madison's protection would be far more valuable than Madison's enmity would be dangerous. Chloe had deliberately cultivated the skills that would make her indispensable to Madison, learning to manage multiple social media accounts, to create and spread rumors effectively, and to document embarrassing moments that could be weaponized when necessary. The three had formed an effective coalition that covered all the major avenues of high school social destruction. Madison provided strategic intelligence and coordinated their efforts. Tyler offered physical intimidation and direct confrontation, while Chloe handled the digital aspects of their campaigns and managed information warfare through social media platforms. Together, they had successfully marginalized or destroyed several students who had threatened Madison's position, using a combination of social isolation, physical intimidation, and digital harassment that left their targets with few options. For effective resistance, Madison's decision to target Sophie had been made after careful analysis of the potential threat. Sophie's artistic success represented to her own college prospects and social standing. She had researched Sophie's background, discovering that Sophie's parents were immigrants who lacked the social connections to protect their daughter from sustained harassment. She had observed Sophie's isolation and lack of friends, recognizing that Sophie would have minimal support if she became the target of systematic abuse. Most importantly, Madison had identified Sophie's art as both her greatest strength and her most vulnerable point, understanding that attacking Sophie's artistic work would cause maximum psychological damage while appearing to target her achievements rather than her person. The timing of their campaign against Sophie had been calculated to coincide with the weeks leading up to the senior art exhibition, when Sophie's stress levels would be highest and her ability to defend herself would be most compromised. Madison understood that artists were particularly vulnerable to attacks on their creative work, that questioning Sophie's talent and authenticity would undermine her confidence in ways that direct personal attacks might not achieve. The plan was to systematically erode Sophie's belief in herself and her work, making her question whether her installation was worthy of the attention it was receiving, ultimately pressuring her to withdraw from the exhibition or to present her work from a position of insecurity and self-doubt. Their campaign represented a perfect storm of social, physical, and digital harassment designed to overwhelm Sophie's defenses and isolate her from any potential support systems. Madison had identified the teachers and administrators who might protect Sophie, developing strategies to undermine their confidence in her work and their willingness to advocate for her. Tyler had mapped Sophie's daily routines and identified the locations where physical intimidation would be most effective and least likely to be witnessed by authority figures. Chloe had begun documenting Sophie's online presence and preparing the digital infrastructure necessary to spread rumors and negative information about Sophie and her family. The three had no way of knowing that they had chosen to target someone whose capabilities extended far beyond anything they had encountered in their previous campaigns. Someone whose technical skills and family support system would allow her to fight back in ways they had never imagined possible. They saw only a quiet, isolated art student who appeared vulnerable and defenseless, not realizing that Sophie's restraint was a choice rather than a limitation, that her silence was strategic rather than fearful, and that their attack on her most precious work would trigger a response that would expose every secret they thought they had hidden safely online. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Sophie's natural inclination toward privacy had led her to consider submitting her installation to the smaller, less prominent display area reserved for underclassmen and students who preferred minimal attention. She had assumed that her work would speak for itself without requiring the social performance that seemed to accompany the main exhibition. Ms. Rivera had other plans entirely. The art teacher had been watching Sophie's progress on her mixed media installation with growing excitement, recognizing that her quiet student had created something exceptional. The piece demonstrated technical sophistication far beyond typical high school work, but more importantly, it possessed an emotional depth and cultural authenticity that would distinguish it from the more conventional pieces that usually dominated the senior show. Ms. Rivera understood that Sophie's work deserved the main exhibition space, and she had spent weeks convincing the reluctant student to submit to the primary display. The process of convincing Sophie had required delicate negotiation. Ms. Rivera had approached the conversation understanding that Sophie's reluctance stemmed from genuine anxiety about exposure rather than false modesty or lack of confidence. In her work, she had emphasized the practical benefits of participation, pointing out that several scholarship opportunities required submission to juried exhibitions, that college portfolio requirements often specified public display experience, and that the connections made at the senior show could influence admission decisions at competitive art programs. More persuasively, Ms. Rivera had appealed to Sophie's sense of responsibility to other quiet students, who might be inspired by seeing work that reflected their own experiences. She had pointed out that the senior exhibition had historically been dominated by students from affluent families who created work that reflected privileged perspectives, and that Sophie's installation would offer something different, something that spoke to the experiences of immigrants and outsiders. The argument that had finally convinced Sophie was Ms. Rivera's observation that visibility was sometimes necessary for protection, that being ignored could be more dangerous than being seen. Sophie's decision to participate in the main exhibition had required her to complete additional documentation and presentation, requirements that pushed her far outside her comfort zone. She had been required to write an artist statement explaining her work's conceptual framework, to participate in installation planning meetings with other exhibiting students, and to attend promotional events where community members could preview the upcoming show. Each of these activities had forced her into social situations she would normally avoid, creating pressure and visibility that felt increasingly uncomfortable as the exhibition date approached. The installation process itself had made Sophie's vulnerability even more acute. Her mixed media piece required significant space and complex setup, necessitating collaboration with the school's technical staff and coordination with other exhibitors. For the first time in her high school career, Sophie found herself working in public view, with classmates and teachers observing her process, offering unsolicited advice, and commenting on her artistic choices. The privacy she had always maintained around her creative work was completely stripped away, leaving her feeling exposed and defensive. The weight of expectation had also created new forms of pressure for Sophie. Ms. Rivera's enthusiasm for her work had attracted attention from other faculty members, some of whom had begun stopping by the art studio to observe Sophie's progress and offer encouragement that felt more like scrutiny. The principal, Mr. Thompson, had mentioned Sophie's installation during morning announcements, describing it as an example of the school's commitment to celebrating diverse perspectives. This official recognition, while well-intentioned, had made Sophie feel like she was representing not just herself, but her entire cultural background, adding layers of responsibility that she had never sought. The scholarship implications of the exhibition had created additional anxiety for Sophie, whose family's financial situation made college funding a critical concern. Several of the scholarships she had identified as possibilities required submission of work that had been displayed in public exhibitions, meaning that her participation in the senior show was no longer optional if she wanted to pursue higher education in art. The knowledge that her future opportunities depended on this single presentation had made every aspect of the installation feel monumentally important, creating pressure that interfered with her ability to work naturally and intuitively. Sophie's isolation had become more pronounced rather than less as her work gained recognition. While other participating students formed social groups around shared exhibition experiences, Sophie found herself increasingly alone in her corner of the art studio. Her success had created a barrier between her and classmates who either felt intimidated by her technical skill or resentful of the attention her work was receiving. She had become simultaneously more visible and more isolated, gaining recognition, while losing the anonymity that had previously protected her from social complications. The timing of the exhibition had also created logistical challenges that increased Sophie's vulnerability. The senior show was scheduled for the final week of classes, meaning that any problems with her installation could not be easily resolved or replaced. She had spent months developing this single piece, putting all her artistic energy into one project rather than creating backup options. This concentration of effort and investment had made her entirely dependent on the success of this particular work, eliminating any safety net if something went wrong. The location of Sophie's installation within the exhibition space had been assigned based on the scale and technical requirements of her piece, placing her work in the main gallery central corridor where it would be impossible to miss or ignore. While this prominence was an honor, it also meant that her work would be among the first pieces visitors encountered, setting expectations for the entire exhibition. Sophie had gone from being invisible to being unavoidably visible, from being protected by obscurity to being exposed by prominence, creating a situation where any failure or embarrassment would be public and memorable. As the exhibition opening approached, Sophie had realized that she had crossed a line from which there was no easy return. Her decision to participate had committed her to a level of exposure and vulnerability that conflicted with every instinct she had developed about staying safe and unnoticed. She had placed her most personal, meaningful work in a position where it could be judged, criticized, or even attacked by anyone who chose to attend the exhibition, creating a perfect storm of artistic, personal, and professional risk that left her feeling more exposed than she had ever been in her life. Madison Walsh had ruled the social hierarchy of Clearwater High School with the kind of effortless authority that came from never having been challenged. At 17, she possessed the perfect combination of natural charisma, strategic intelligence, and calculated ruthlessness that made her both admired and feared by her classmates. Standing tall at 5 feet 8 inches with perfectly styled auburn hair and an impressive collection of designer clothes that showcased her family's wealth, Madison commanded attention wherever she went. As vice president of the student council and captain of the debate team, she had learned to weaponize her communication skills, using words like surgical instruments to cut down anyone who threatened her position. Madison's family background had provided her with every advantage imaginable.